Hello, welcome to Board Gamers League. My name is Joseph, and today we're going to be taking you through a tutorial of the game Decatur. Let's start with the pieces. You can see here several different pieces, and of course for each player they'll have a specific color. But you're going to have three types of pieces. These squares are called factor, and the factor are your main power in the game to move into different spaces. You're also going to have ports, and from those ports, fleets. We have a couple of decks that are used through the game, a prosperity deck and an influence deck. The prosperity deck is going to contain color cards that match the different areas on the map. While the influence deck will contain symbols that match the different symbols on the map. For here we have a nice token to mark our intervals. And this just goes along the top, marking your when you've made it through an interval so you don't lose your place in the game. We have some dice that we use in a particular spot, which we'll go over in a minute. And then we also have a player's card that goes over all the possible moves you can make in a simple fashion, so you can hold this while you play and have an easy reference. On the back of it, it references a turn order. If we look at the board, you can see that we have a map of the world, and that map is divided into several areas, and those areas are designated by specific color to help you know which area you're in. Within each area, there are the circles, which are different locations. And within each location, there's a symbol that will have an effect on your game. Your factor, when we look at a round, will sit in the different locations and control the locations that they sit in. The other things we have on the board that will become of use when we go through the gameplay are these tokens here at the bottom. And both sets of these tokens are just markers to help you in your gameplay. This set on the right helps when you try to do a hostile takeover. And they mark a specific number of benefits that you get depending on your position in the board. And then these tokens you will use at the end of an interval phase to help designate which area is the most prosperous and which area is the least prosperous. As I said before, you have intervals at the top. The interval is the length of the game. A short game in Decatur is 3 intervals, and a long game in Decatur is 4 intervals. Each interval is made up of several rounds. Down here we have our round marker. So when we start our first interval, we then move to our round marker, and each player will take a turn. After each player has taken a turn, you're going to move the round marker 1 square forward. Then each player will take another turn, and so on and so forth as you go around the clock. When you get to the clock symbol, you're going to flip the timepiece over. Each player will take another turn. But what will happen is the next time we move the timepiece forward, we're going to get into the gray shaded area. Now, when we're in the gray shaded area, the interval could end at any time. You're going to take 2 dice and you're going to roll them. The number in the gray shaded area, in this case we're looking at a 4, is what you'll use against the dice. If the dice roll is divisible by the number in the box, the round ends and the interval ends immediately. So for example, I roll my dice and I roll the number 8. 8 is divisible by 4, therefore I would flip my clock over, and that would represent the end of the interval. There will be some things that will happen at the end of the interval that we'll explain in a minute, but for now, I just want you to understand that that ends the interval, and you would move into your second interval after you do your end of interval phase. If I roll the dice and I come up with a number, in this example, let's say I roll a 9, 9 is not divisible by 4, then it's a normal round. Each player takes another turn, and the timepiece moves forward one space. And then again, we repeat that process. I will roll the dice. If the number now is divisible by 3, the round and the interval will end. If it's not, we will all take another turn, and so on and so forth, until we get to this final number 1, in which case any number you roll will be divisible by 1 and the interval will end. One thing to note, let's say I rolled the 4 in this example with the 4, and I rolled the 8, and was divisible by 4, and the interval ended. At that point, we'll do our end of interval phase, but when we start our next interval, the gameplay will start from that space. At no time do I move my token back to the beginning of the white squares. So the game has a randomization factor of where it may end, but all the turns will be used, and so you'll never lose a turn in the game Decatur. So let me take you through the setup of the beginning of the interval. Let me take you through a setup for the beginning of the interval. And what it's going to revolve around is these prosperity cards. You're going to take a prosperity card and pass one prosperity card face up to each number of players you have in the game. For this example, I'm going to pretend I have 4 players. So I've passed 4 prosperity cards around the board. Then I'm going to take my prosperity cards and pass each player 2 cards face down. These are cards that only the player knows what he or she has in their hand. The prosperity cards that are face up correspond to an area, and once they are passed out, for your convenience, you can put them right around the board near the area that they go, so that you can see which area has the most visible prosperity. And of course, we don't know which area has the prosperity that's in each player's hands. Prosperity is a mechanism that is going to be effective at the end of the interval. So when we start the game, we can see, in this example, we have 2 prosperity cards in Middle Asia. It looks like the most prosperous region. And what that means is we're going to want to be in Middle Asia because our factors are going to prosper the most. How factors prosper is at the end of the interval. When the end of the interval happens, the players reveal all the cards that they have. And then we get a full revelation of which area has the most prosperity. From that point, we use these tokens. If Middle Asia had the most prosperity, it would get the 4 token. If Europe had the second most prosperity, it would get the 3 token. And so on and so forth until we come to the area that has the least amount of prosperity cards. And let's use Oceania as this example. It would get the 0 or the skull and crossbone token, in meaning it has no prosperity. When the location has the number, you're going to have factor in the board at those in the different areas, and you square your factor up to the number that is associated with the area. So for instance, this player has 2 factor in Middle Asia. It's worth 4. So he takes 2 more factor from his pile and adds them to this location to get it to 4. This location, Persia, was also in Middle Asia. It only has 1, so it gets 3 factor added to it to bring us to 4. If the location had more than 4 factor, let's say This one has 6. Then I would take off 2 pieces to bring my factor down to 4. And that happens in all the areas and all the locations. In Europe, because it had the 3, it had the third most prosperity cards, its factors are going to move up and down by 3. And when we get to the skull and crossbones, if I had any factor in this area, I would lose them all. One thing to note around the board are these pies. These pies have to do with tiebreakers for the prosperity cards. So let's say Oceania had 2 prosperity cards and Middle Asia had 2 prosperity cards. The tiebreaker is determined by these pies. You can see that this pie has 2 dark areas. This pie has 3 dark areas. The pie with the most dark areas wins. So in this case, Oceania would be the more prosperous region than Middle Asia. These pies will rotate between intervals, giving the different areas an opportunity to have the tiebreaker. And that is shown to you, the order of which way they rotate right on this card. And you can see in interval 1, Europe has the highest tiebreaker, then Oceania, then Middle Asia, Africa, East Asia. But in interval 2, it goes the other way. Now, East Asia in interval 2 will get the best tiebreaker. Africa will get the second best. Middle Asia stays in the middle. Oceania would get the 4th one, and the last one would go to Europe. So it switches back and forth between each interval, and it's clearly marked on your player card. Now let me take you through a round and show you the different turns, the different movements you could make on a turn, and by those movements, secure the most prosperous regions so that you get the most factor on the board and you win the game. The very beginning of the game starts out with a restructuring move. Restructuring is a move you can do at any point during the game, but it is also the way we first get our pieces out in the game. What restructuring means is that you're going to take 7 units and place it in any one empty location on the board, anywhere on the board that you want. So, let's say that I thought India and East Asia was going to be the best place to be. I'm just going to take my 7 factor and place them on the board. Now, why I said that you could do this anytime during the game, if later in the game I have a few pieces out, but not that many, and they're not where I want to be, I could choose to restructure. I would clear out all my pieces off the board, and then I would add 7 new pieces, again, anywhere that I want. So in the first round, each player is going to restructure, and they're going to put 7 pieces on the board. From there on, you have a few things that you can do each turn. You can draw an influence card. You can exchange your influence card. I'll put this one back and I'll take this one into my hand. You can do the restructure move that we talked about. You can expand. Expand means that I get to add one factor to 2 different locations. So let's say I have these 2 locations. I expand and put 1 factor in each of them. If you have multiple locations, you're still only putting 1 factor in each, but now I might choose to put 1 factor in this one and 1 factor in this one. The expansion rule never lets you put 2 factors in 1 location. You do need to put 1 factor in 2 different locations. After that, you could consolidate. I have pieces in several different areas and I want to gather them together. You can consolidate by moving across these dotted lines. And I can move as much factor as I want in there, including leaving a location empty if I choose to do so. Or you can consolidate, by moving across an ocean location. You don't need any special pieces on the board to move across oceans. Your factor units all have the capability to move across an ocean. So here's the Indian Ocean. It's marked by this line. And let's say I'm consolidating to Indochina. I could bring this piece over to Indochina. You will notice that the oceans are marked by these lines. So there's the Atlantic, the Indian, and the Pacific. I cannot move two oceans to consolidate. I can only move one. I have to be in the same geographical area. The next thing we can do is called venture. Venture is where you'll do your hostile takeover, but it can also just be the takeover of an empty location. So now I've laid my 7 factor on the board. I laid them here in Indochina, but I want to take over East China. I do this venture move. I go from one location to another location. And again, you can always move by the dotted lines if you're connected, or you can do an ocean journey. There is one exception with the venture rule that's different from the consolidation rule. In the venture rule, I can go into the ocean area that I'm in, but I can also go one adjacent ocean. So I have a greater number of locations that I could reach. So as an example of that, let's say that I'm in Manchuria and I want to move into the Horn of Africa. I'm going to do the venture move. I'm going to take one of my units. Here's one ocean. I can go to the adjacent ocean. This location borders the adjacent ocean, so I can move there. On the flip side, let's say I wanted to go to West Africa, which is in the Atlantic Ocean. I can't reach that with my Manchurian factor because I've got one ocean, I'm into my second ocean, and I cannot make the third ocean. These boxes here are going to tell you the effects when we're taking over a location in a hostile takeover situation. So let me put some pieces on the board and I'll show you how each of those work. So let's say that your pieces are in East Africa and you've decided you wanted to take over India. I can do my venture move. I'm going to choose to move all 4 of these pieces and I just bring them into India. In the game Decatur, it's simply having more factors than the other player means you win the round. But there are a couple of effects that you must get through. When you move across an ocean or from a location and not by a dotted line, then the defender gets a +2 for you having to cross water. So now this location has 2 factor and a +2, so it's as if it has 4 factor. And I have 4 factor. So a tie will go to the defender, and I would lose this battle for India. The other thing that can affect a battle is these symbols that are inside the location. You'll notice this is a flag symbol. When I crossed to India, I knew that I had this card in my hand. I can hold 3 of these cards in my hands with the players not knowing how many I have. And after I have 3, if I drew another one, I would have to play one. And I can have 3 cards on the table. So total cards, I could have 3 in my hand and 3 on the table. So I had 3 cards in my hand. I came over. The player had 2 pieces and the logistics to give him +2. And then we say, do you want to play a card? I say yes. So I played this card. This gives me 2 more points to more victory. That's these 2 influence points. So now I have 6 compared to 4, and I would win that round. At the end of the battle, or hostile takeover, you're gonna roll for attrition. You roll the 2 dice, and there's some numbers here that tell you either nobody will lose 1 piece, the person who lost the battle will lose 1 piece, or both players will lose 1 piece. But at any time, either player will only lose 1 piece. So let's say this person lost 1 factor. After that, the defender must relocate. He can relocate to an adjacent, friendly, or unoccupied location, or he can relocate to a friendly location by sea, but not an unoccupied location. So this player could choose to use a dotted line to get here because it's empty, or he could use his sea movement to go to a friendly location. That's the end of the battle. The player who won the battle, the factor that he brought across have to be in the location. If he had factor left over in the other location, he could choose to bring those over as well. That would be an option for him. But the battle ends, and it's the next player's turn. Now, there is one other thing that can affect your battles, and it's one other turn choice that you have, and that is to build a port. If I choose to build a port, if I don't have any other ports out, then it costs me 2 factor. So I'm building a port, I don't have any other ports out, I have a port in this area. If I had this port out and I wanted to build another port, then it always costs me the 2 factor plus the number of ports I have out. So in this case, it costs me 3 factor to build my next port, so on and so forth. When you build your port, it counts as 2 plus 2 to any hostile takeovers or any defense of hostile takeovers. But these ports themselves don't count as factor and won't be counted up at the end of the game. Or if you restructure, they don't come off the board. They are not actual factor, they're a port. When you build a port, you get to place a fleet in the ocean. 1 fleet per port. You can only have 2 fleets in any one ocean. The fleets will give you a +1 to any hostile takeover or defense of any location that is in the ocean that your fleet is in. That are really all your choices of movements in the game of Decatur, and that's what you'll do each round until you get to the end of the interval. And then, as stated before, at the end of the interval, you'll reveal your prosperity cards and you'll adjust your factor. You'll go to the next interval and you'll do all those rounds with all those movements again until you get to the end of the game. At the end of the game, after you've adjusted the factors for each area, then you'll simply count up the total factors that you have on the board, and the player with the most factors wins. Well, we think this is an exciting board game for you here. We hope you enjoy playing it and have a great gameplay playing Decatur.